And Tony Barnhart should be joining us here in just a minute. Doug, I'm going to tell you what, man. You get Mr. College Football on here and Paul Finebaum on here. If you can't
You
get
kidding me?
talking about college football, something wrong with you. And I tell you what, Monday night when Paul Finebaum was at the Touchdown Club, it was so much fun. Well, the funniest thing was when they said, raise your hand in this room, and it was packed. If you've ever heard Paul Finebaum, and there wasn't a hand that didn't go up. And I had to do it, Doug, when I asked him a question, and I said, Paul.
Oh, no. You're going to do it this morning. You got to do it this morning.
I asked him off to the side. I said, my calculations, if correct, place Mildred at somewhere around 104. I'm sure she looks great. But
gosh,
anyway.
Yeah, you got to do that. But then again, Brendan, good morning, Brendan. Brendan is going to cut you off at 15 seconds.
Yeah, today especially. I'm on it today. You boys better watch it. We got one of my favorite people on the planet Earth right now. I'd much rather talk to you to him than you two turkeys. Mr. College Football, Tony Barnhart.
I would too.
Classiest guy in the history of sports, Mr. Tony Barnhart. Welcome to Rob Browne's show.
It's sideline.
Mr. Tony, Football in the house.
Yeah, it's always good to be on with you guys. Always
absolutely love it.
Rob, the only question when you're talking to Paul is how many W's are actually in Paul? Okay,
Paul. I love it. Yeah, I tell you, the more every year passes, the more we just love everything that goes with college football, Tony. And I had a bunch of people yesterday. I was a pallbearer in a funeral for John Turner, one of my great friends, biggest Alabama fan on the planet. Everybody had to wear a red tie, and there were Ole Miss fans in there and Auburn people and different people wearing them. But the talk in that eulogy about college football, how it pulls us together, was unbelievable. You're gifted as a writer. You talk so much about it, and it's just I've never seen anything like it. The talk about happy memories of people's lives, and it always would get back to Alabama and college football and the lunch groups that get together. But they say this is the off season, but it's not. So we want to hear your thoughts on college football and about your book, The 19 of Green, which is a great book. And I love the story because it just backs up what we love about college football in America.
Well, thank you for saying that. We've been very pleased with the way the 19 of Green has turned out. Everywhere we go, we met. I tell you something. I grew up in Union Point, Georgia.
Yes,
a suburb of Greensboro, and earlier this year they celebrated the 120th anniversary of the founding of Union Point, and they invited my wife and I to come back and be a part of that celebration. And we met a lot of people and talked about the book. And this is the thing. You guys have heard me talk about my boys who travel with me to Georgia, Florida, and playoffs and stuff like that. What we always say among us is college brought us together. College brought us together, but college football has kept us together. And that's the magic of college football, is that it is something to build your falls around, and it maintains. And families who may not be speaking to each other will have a 4-generation tailgate at a college football game, rather than sit around a Thanksgiving table. This is much easier and a lot more fun. So it is a unique place in our culture, and people from other parts of the world simply do not understand, and they kind of get it when you explain it to them. But it's a unique American institution.
Yeah, it is. Doug, I think you would agree.
Tony, good morning. I bet you've been to Birmingham, Alabama a time or two.
Once or twice.
Yeah.
I'm speaking to the Rotary Club in June. So, yeah.
Fantastic. I'll try to get an invite to that if I can. But first of all, I wanted to thank you for through all these years, and I'm not trying to age you, but decades of you. To me, you always brought class and dignity, but a lot of humor and engagement to your writing, especially. But then when you became a radio and TV personality, nothing dropped off in the way of interest and quality. So thank you for all of that. And I know that when you wrote it, no matter what article you write, you get about 70% that are mad at you and 30% that like you, I suppose. But my question is, and it's kind of might be related to the book you just published. I think that football fans, maybe more than anything else, love, like a fine wine, love the big monumental upset in college football. You could say the same in basketball, but football's different. I have one of my worries. I could have many of them, like an old man yelling at clouds, but curious your opinion. What can the governance do to preserve the possibility, however unlikely, that we will continue to get to enjoy that monumental upset that makes the 12-team playoff, Tony?
Well, I think as long as the scholarship levels remain about the same, that I think that has a lot to do with it. Now, you cannot account for the fact that, let's face it, the University of Alabama or the University of Georgia has more disposable income to spend on football than other institutions that play the game. I mean, it's a wide variance of who can afford to play. But as long as the scholarship remains the same, you've got an Appalachian State versus Michigan, okay?
Yeah.
And again, it's one thing to have a lot of money, but it's another thing to get between the lines for 60 minutes and play. Yeah. You still got to play. And so I think we'll still have it. What I'm looking forward, guys, is this year when we go to the 12-team playoff, two things. One, will there of the 12 teams that are invited, how many teams will be from the SEC and the Big Ten? What's the number? I said if you were a betting man, the over and under is 6.5. Okay, yeah. maybe 5.5, something like that. And will we have an upset, a big upset in the round of 12? And I think those are the two things I'm really interested to find out.
Yeah, you got to play, just as an Auburn guy just asked Coach Freeze in that New Mexico State debacle last year. You got to play.
Yeah. You always, and Tony, what's really neat is you've written over the years, you started out in Greensboro, North Carolina. So you know the ACC, the SEC. I like to say we're first cousins. Kind of the Big 12, though, is the same thing. In the middle is the SEC. The footprint with Texas and OU coming in. Have you been out to Texas to do any stuff? July 1st is going to be here before we know it.
Right. I've not been out there yet. I've been to Texas many, many times.
Yeah.
It's one of the great college towns for our friends in the SEC who have not been to Austin. It is going to be an incredible treat. And if they had 1 million tickets, they could sell them to Georgia fans. That's how. A friend of mine who's has worked for the University of Texas for 35 years told me it is going to easily be the toughest home ticket they have ever had at the University of Texas, Austin.
Yeah.
There's no disputing Tony's comment.
I love it.
Regarding Georgia. Just go back to that Georgia home game in South Bend, Indiana, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, God. And, that might have been the craziest thing ever. You know, to kind of give you, Tony, an idea of the interest, I talked to someone at one of the SEC schools that I love a lot. They had a bunch of spots show up in a scholarship section this year. The demand was so high. The last 2 seats went for over $300,000 in cumulative giving just to get them. And what I love about college football is after the game, when the players are coming out, is watching their families and everybody meeting them, and the sports writers in there, getting those tidbits of information. You think about the people you've been so blessed. You got to sit with Vince Dooley, Pat Dye, Irk Russell, all these coaches and all. You ever thought about maybe doing a book just on after the game, what happens, and Saturday morning conversations? Because you're one of the few writers I think that people would trust enough to do that with.
Well, what I like about that idea, Rob, I was thinking of different things that have happened in the past. You talk about the Notre Dame Georgia game in 2017. I was in the Georgia locker room. They were bringing the players out to talk to us, and I get done and I walk outside, and outside is Kirby Smart and his dad, Sonny Smart, a great high school coach. Yeah. And they were standing together and sort of hugging and all that. And I'm saying, I've just witnessed one of the great moments in the lives of these two men. Sonny Smart gets to see his son post what was his biggest win to date over Notre Dame at Notre Dame on the way to a national championship appearance. And so, there's a lot of things like that happen.
Yeah, and the bottom line is, as you go through the years, the players that played at, let's say, Georgia or Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Tennessee, you pick them. As they get older, they come back. The stories get better and better. People say there's embellishment, whatever, like that. With what we've got going on now, do you think these kids are going to wake up one day and realize, man, I should have stuck it out and not bounced around 2 or 3 times?
Right. And but that, we all have the benefit of maturity and age and experience. This is something that they haven't had. They haven't had this experience. They haven't gone through these things like we have. But yeah, I feel very confident that there will be a number of these guys who were, and let's be honest, they're transferring, trying to get a better NIL deal. They're trying to get the best deal they can get. Yeah. And that's why a lot of, guys who are playing and who are doing fine leave because I know there's a better deal out there for me. So, that's, and only time will tell if you live to regret that.
Yeah. Tony, to your point, one of my favorite pearls of wisdom, it's a cliche, but the reason most things become cliches is there's a kernel of truth in them. But it's youth is wasted on the young.
Yeah.
And what makes that so delicious, to your point about college football and these athletes that suddenly have life-altering money, although it probably sounds to them like more money than it actually is these days. But when you say to a young person, that saying, youth is wasted on the young, and invariably their response is, I don't understand what that means. You just made my point for me.
Absolutely. Well, it's like anything else. You when you're young, you go at things a certain different way, and the question always is, yeah, you got this, but what did you give up to get that? It's like when guys are leaving their senior year of high school, they leave a year early. They load up on credits and they can enroll early and miss their senior years. I've never been in favor of that. It's not my decision to make. But man, you don't pass up your senior year. You don't pass up your senior year in high school, and if you can, you don't pass up your senior year in college. I mean, those are moments that you never get back.
It's hard. Yeah. How do you value monetarily the network of when you were a 3 or 4 year athlete and bonded with that student body, faculty, administration, athletic department, deep and wide alumni base, the marketing and career value of that players, it's hard for them to think about that. I'm curious, Tony, since I think you're uniquely qualified to do this, and that's forecast. Tell us out at the 5 to 10 year mark from today, what we might expect college football to look like in terms of governance, in terms of, are these athletes employed? Is there collective bargaining? What's happening with the are there just 2 big conferences like the NFL? What do you think is most likely to happen in the shape of football?
I think 5 to 10 years from now, college football will look a lot like the NFL because it will have no choice. It will have to enter to give the players what they have earned. But you will have to do something to eliminate antitrust situation. There's going to have to be an antitrust thing given. There's going to have to be collective bargaining, and the players will sign contracts. And that because it's any other method that you could describe, guys, is going to violate antitrust law. Just saw a story today talking about the NCAA is looking at billions and billions of this case out on the West Coast, House, I think it is.
Yeah, House versus NCAA.
Right, and if they find in favor of the plaintiff, then you're talking about billions and billions and billions of dollars. So the point is, the NCAA is going to spend the rest of its life fighting off lawsuits, and the only way around it, I think, is to come up with a collective bargaining arrangement so there is no antitrust violation. There'll be a salary cap. All those things are in place in the NFL because of a reason. Bottom line, Nick Saban said this, and this is what I've hung my hat on. Says we're not going back to the old days. Those days are gone. They're gone forever, and we're not going back. But at the same token, what we have now is unsustainable. All right.
Yeah.
So there is a sweet spot in there somewhere that we've got to find, and we've got to find the leadership to get it done. It's just, Congress may have to get involved to get the antitrust part of this thing fixed. But I was told by a congressman last summer, said, you can forget about us getting involved. We're not doing anything until after the presidential election. Okay.
Yeah.
When the presidential election's over, now Congress can turn and maybe take a serious look at this. But for now, we've got at least one more year of what we had on the NIL front.
Do you think there's a fair shake? I was telling Rob and someone else on his show maybe a week ago that call me crazy as an SEC and all, particularly Auburn guy, but mostly SEC, all of college football. But I have a romance and an appreciation for the little guy. And they probably are offended being called a little guy, but whether it's UCF or Cincinnati, and you get in that range, they're certainly capable. That they will have the advantage of keeping players longer because, frankly, they probably are 3 stars mostly and can't easily transfer. So do you think college football can have a place for, for example, when Boise knocked off Oklahoma back in 2007, was it? Can we still preserve that element of college football?
I think absolutely. Again, it's one thing to have a lot more money than the other guy. It's another thing to field a team and to win the game on the field. So I think that and here's the thing that I like about the 12-team playoff. You saw how hard it was for Cincinnati to get in a 14 playoff. They did it, but they're the first non-Power 5 to get in there, and the Power 5 was always going to be favored in a 14 playoff.
Yep.
This opens up the field. In fact, guarantees a spot for the Group of 5. A Group of 5 team will be in it every single year. So the first thing you got to do before you do all else is you got to have access to the playoffs. And from the time we started at 4 teams, the access was there, but it was hard for a non-Power 5 team to get in. At least this way they have access, and then with access, things can happen.
Yeah. Tony, when you think about it, college football fans, wherever you go in the country, they're proud of their programs. I mean, Wyoming, it's a big deal out there to them. You've been able to travel a lot. And I think along the line of Doug's question, that's what will keep college football popular nationwide. Is as much as you might think I'm crazy to say this, there wouldn't be any interest in the Iron Bowl. If you're an Auburn fan and you want Alabama to lose every game, TV's not going to show an 0-11 team against an undefeated Auburn team or vice versa. And I'm one of these people that I love my school, but I couldn't do this show if I didn't love the other ones. I get as excited about their schools as their own fans do. That's something my wife said about me. I said, well, I guess I do. And it's not fake, it's real, because this is so much fun no matter what. We've got great storylines. Then we bring people like you and Doug, and I've got Brendan, an unbelievable producer. But when Buddy Martin's on here, that's how I – and Lauren Smith, you see in the back, I need your book so I can put it on the set, by the way. I will put it on the set. But it's the stories and it's the connective part of it, Tony. I mean, don't you get that feeling when you go out and about how we want to beat each other, but in 2020, I think we realized how much we really care about each other.
Right. I think that was a transformational period. You know what, Rob, what people have a tough time understanding is when you go somewhere. Here's something that the rank and file fans don't understand is for the Georgia Bulldogs to basically take over Notre Dame Stadium in 2017 and have 50,000 people there. And at the end of the game, they shout SEC. Yes. SEC. And they I promise you, the Notre Dame fans I talked to, why are you yelling for the SEC? I said, let me explain it to you. And that is a unique part of our culture in that I may hate your guts, but when you're playing Notre Dame, I'm pulling for you. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm pulling for everybody in the SEC except the team I'm playing that day. And other people from other parts of the country do not understand that mentality.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tony, did you happen to see, and you're not obligated to have seen it, but I think you would absolutely love it. Did you see the documentary about Coach Pat Dye that was recently produced?
I missed that.
It's still Rob's got your number. He can send you. I think at Alabama Public TV, maybe even on YouTube, you can still get it. If only for the segment of that talks about his roots at Georgia, his tough growing up, and how that shaped it, and just the fascination to me for Georgia and Auburn fans in particular of how unlikely it was that the great Vince Dooley, an Auburn guy, is so legendary at Georgia, and Pat Dye, legend at Georgia, so legendary and beloved. Believe me, beloved at Auburn. Yeah.
No question, and I'll look forward to seeing that. I have so many memories of Coach Dye. I was, that iconic scene when he talks about he's getting ready to leave, and they win, they beat Alabama, and he's talking about, I wouldn't give anything for you guys. I watched you grow men. I watched you fight after those angels. And I was in the, I'm standing 20, 30 feet away when he does that, and I still get emotional when I see it. I know what the emotion in that room felt like. And so here's something else that people didn't know about Coach Dye. Pat Dye was a football All-American at the University of Georgia. He was also an academic All-American at the University of Georgia. So,
he had a street wisdom that, Pat Dye was, we have to be honest and not revise his life and history, which to me would be irreverent. But he was famous for some gaffes. You're scared to put a mic in front of him. But Auburn fans didn't care, to your point, Tony, because we knew he was authentic, and he brought respect to Auburn when that program most needed it.
Yeah.
No question. And I will never forget sitting at his office, and I think it was the run up to the Alabama game, and we were just talking, and I looked behind me on his door to his office. Attached to his office, but the back of his office door was pictures of about 100 children that his mamas and daddies and grandparents had sent to him, and he put them up on his door.
Well, you know what? The coolest thing, the November 29th of 2013, two of my clients gave us their 2 tickets for my 2 boys. My daughter stayed up in Franklin with the grandparents for Thanksgiving. I took Wilson and Max down there. I had 2 tickets, section 42. And my friend, Joel Johnson's niece, had worked for Coach Dye for a couple of years. And he said, hey, if you want to bring them out there to the farm Friday about 4:30 and visit, come on. So we went out there and visited. And I said, here's the deal. Don't talk bad about Alabama, because Coach Bryant was like a father to him. Don't talk bad about Georgia, because he was an All-American at Georgia. And I believe his mother had season tickets to Georgia till the day she died. And Nat and Wayne, his older brothers, played there. And I said, just more important than anything else, just listen. And we went in there and spent about an hour. It was just him in the treehouse out there at the lake. And he was watching the LSU-Arkansas game. And Zach Mettenberger had been hurt. And he was sitting down on the bench. And I'm sitting there, and I remember when he said, he goes, I don't like that. I didn't say why. He goes, he ought to be up there on that other good leg cheering his teammates on. That's what a quarterback ought to do. But my son Wilson goes, Coach, you think we're going to beat Alabama tomorrow? And he goes, well, I tell you one thing. He goes, Gus is going to get after their ass. And I said, Coach, we're going to make them play a full 60. That's going to be the key. And it came down to but you just remember that, but you just listen to him. Tony, George Lapidus, the late George Lapidus, I'm sure you knew him.
Yes.
Wrote for the Press Scimitar. Remember the Skywriters Tour, just Philip Marshall and all the guys. Y'all, that's what we grew up with, okay? It's like we grew up with classic rock. But the coolest thing, George put in there one time in the paper, he had a thing about Pat Dye sold watermelons with his brothers when he was a kid. Watermelon, red to the Rhine. If you're going to buy one of mine. In Blythe, Georgia. Only a writer can get a story like that,
That's a great story. It's Pat Dye was truly one of those iconic people he is Southern football. People would tell the story about when he would go recruiting, and he would sit there in the living room and talk, and then here comes Mama picking up dishes, and so he goes into the kitchen with her, and while she washes, he dries the dishes.
Yep. Yeah. Hey,
great recruiting move. Just a great.
Unbelievable. If you got a second or two, Paul Finebaum's in the room. If he can come in here with you, but Tony, I think it's the coolest thing. Paul Finebaum, We got Doug Dean in Birmingham, Brendan Martin, Buddy's son down there in Ocala, executive producer, and Tony Barnhart, Mr. College Football. And I got to say, I've never had a show when Pete said, you're going to have Mr. College Football and Paul Finebaum on. Thanks for taking time to join us. How are you this morning?
Listen, I'm just honored to be on any program, any stage with Tony Barnhart. It is. I like to say he's many years older than me, and he's been one of my idols. But even though he isn't, but he is. He still is one of my idols, even though we were fairly similar in age.
Well, yeah. Paul and I we're old newspaper guys, and all of us old newspaper guys have sort of fraternity when we look out after each other.
Because I think we're the only two left, Tony.
I think you're right, Paul.
Yeah. Well, Paul and Tony, this is Doug Dean. Paul, good to see you again, and I hope Linda as well. She provided unbelievable care for my dear old mom, who's still ticking at 88. But I wanted to ask both of y'all, you great writers. Some of us who are old enough to really lament what I would call almost the death of beautiful sports journalism and writing. It's just the way of the world and how money gets made. And it's not that if you get the athletic and there's still good writing, but I miss, Paul, your irreverent commentary and opinion on a daily basis here in Birmingham, Alabama. Do you think there can be a generation that brings back some of that just superior writing that takes some work? It's not easy. It's like delivering a baby, especially a book. Paul, I'll start with you on that.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, there are still places, not many, where great writing exists. The problem is that, and I'll sound like everyone else when I say this, but because information flows so quickly, there's very little patience, and I'll include myself in that because, I mean, I'll see a long story, like the story a couple of weeks ago in the Washington Post about Kim Mulkey. And you wait for it, and you start reading and looking, and when you don't see something salacious, you just keep moving very quickly, and then you never go back. I think that kind of writing needs to be in your hands, whether it's in a magazine or a newspaper where you literally pick it up. It's hard to read on your phone while you're waiting for an Uber at the airport.
Yeah,
Tony,
Paul. Yeah, I was going to say, Paul. I remember when you first started writing. I think it was 1982. I was a freshman at Auburn in the press box. You had been in Birmingham, I think, for the Penn State-Alabama game. Alabama won like 42-21. Remember you used to wear that English writing hat that you used to wear, the slouched hat? And you were the young writer down there. And everybody in there was going, that's the guy from the Birmingham Post-Herald. I'm with Doug. Tony, I think you all would agree. You made people think and get out of their comfort zones. And that's what we need more of.
Well, and Tony can relate to this. One of my first games I went to, I ran to Mike Fleming, who some of you guys may remember.
I knew him well. Wow. Yeah,
he was at the Commercial Appeal and always one of my mentors. And I said, Mike, why are you dressed up in a suit at a football game? And he said, because I'm going to work. That's right. For a long time, I did the same thing. And I know Tony, your mentors at the AJC did the same thing. And after a while, and by the way, if you remember, the coaches were all dressed up too. They weren't wearing Nike and Under Armour gear. But it was just a different time. I mean, I love, one of my favorite things as a young writer was going up to the legends. I told Skip Bayless this story. Now, by the way, I don't claim to know him anymore. But when I met him for the first time at ESPN, I told him, I said, my very first Cotton Bowl in 1980, I walked up to you. I mean, I was scared. He was a couple of years older than me, obviously. And then I got to meet guys like Furman Bisher and all of the giants of that era, Tony. And to me, that's what I wanted to be, one of those guys that hung around the oak tree at Augusta.
No, you look Furman Bisher, Blackie Sherrod, all those great writers who would always collectively meet together at a hospitality room when we were on the road, and and those were the guys you looked up to. And to go back to the previous point, guys, there's always going to be a demand for good writing. The problem is, as Paul pointed out, we have such a short attention span now. I think there will always be a place for writing, but you got to be willing to promote it and say, hey, this is something you ought to read. One of the things they do in the AJC here in Atlanta now that I like is they can't because of deadlines, they can't get all the box scores in. But what they do is they have one really good, readable, full-page story a day, something that is worth reading. So I think that's something that we ought to. We have great writing. It's just that people want to move too fast.
Yeah. Paul, looking in your show every day, and I said this to you Monday night when you came to the Touchdown Club, and I told everybody on the show before you came on. Remember when Harold Grader, actually when Mr. Ritchie was introducing you, he said, "Raise your hand in here if you've ever heard Paul Finebaum." There wasn't a hand that didn't go up, and but the effect that you have, you went to Christian Brothers High School, my school, and you finished at White Station, but it's so cool being a Memphian that you're from Memphis. And then you go to Birmingham. And those two cities now, this show has been built on the MBA, Memphis, Birmingham, Atlanta. We have like Doug's in Birmingham, Tony's over in Atlanta. But you know how to talk to people. And that talk you gave the other night, Harold Grader and you, I love that format. Remember you did it with Lou Holtz at coachsafely.org? That's what we need. Like when Tony's on and you're on, it doesn't get any better. So, Paul, y'all take over. We want to hear what your thoughts are on college football, the passion of the fans, and whatever's on your mind, because it's all about Paul and Tony Barnhart. You can't get any better than this. This is like getting Led Zeppelin back together.
Well, just call me Jimmy Page. Tony, what I heard the other night, and I hear it everywhere I go, and it was so cool. Kurt Watson was in the audience, and
yes,
when they told me that was Kurt Watson, my mouth dropped, because what that did to me, and I'll make the point about sports in a minute, is it took me back to being a teenager. It took me back to watching Tennessee football, and I don't care how many people say, well, it's terrible these days. The players are making money, the coaches are making $13 million. But on Saturday morning in Athens, Georgia, or Tuscaloosa, Alabama, it doesn't matter. I'm there extremely early. I see we get there at 6:30 or 7, or sometimes earlier and sometimes later, and the fans they're anticipatory. They don't care how much the players are making. It's an experience for them, their children, their grandchildren. It doesn't make any difference, because you only get 6 or 7 of those a year. This isn't like Major League Baseball, where you have 7 games in a week at home, perhaps. So I'm not happy with what's happening in the game, but I'm not happy what's happening in my own industry. Tony and I could spend the next 10 hours on.
Oh, wow.
But you just have to accept it. And I'm still going to the game, and so are 105,000 at Neyland Stadium every other Saturday.
Paul, go ahead, Tony. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, Paul is absolutely right. The reality is, all during the last summer, people were complaining to me about NIL and all the stuff that's going on, and I don't like this, and this is going to destroy college football. And we've heard all of those arguments. But the irony of all this, guys, is that with all the issues, NIL, transfer portal, with all of that, the game played on the field is better than it's ever been. It is a great, great game that delivers every single Saturday. These other things that we're talking about, NIL, transfer portal, these are things college football has always had to work through issues, but they've always come out the other side, and the game is better than it's ever been. So we're going to get there. We're going to have to live, in my opinion, we're going to have to live with the NIL and the uncertainty of it for at least a year. And then we'll see what happens. But the game, Paul's right, when the game kicks off on Saturday, we don't care about any of this stuff. Show me my team playing their team.
Paul, I have looked forward to this question. This is a retro. Going to bring you back to 1990 in Birmingham when your show was in its heyday. And my good Bama friends will and initially painfully remember Gene Stallings' 0-3 start to what turned out to be a decent season with that monumental 9-6 win over Tennessee, and they knocked Auburn off later in the year. It was sort of foretold that 92 was going to be a monster year. But you remember, Paul, and your great producer, Pat Smith, you guys took some chances back then, brother, that when Alabama dropped the game, the third game to at Georgia, 17-16 loss. I like that score, by the way. You can figure out why. So there was you went on air Monday, and I guess Pat Smith had produced this spoof of the old Randy Travis song, "Digging Up Bones," and you took a chance it was "Digging Up Bear." I feel queasy even bringing that up in 2024, but that was just historical fact. So how edgy was it back then to be 1990 compared to the shock jock all over the airwaves nowadays with Twitter and everything else? Was that a scary decision for you and your producers to take chances like that back then?
Well, it wasn't, because we were at a just terrible station, and that hardly anybody had ever listened to before. So we felt like we could gamble. It's not like today when you're where I am now, where you have to answer to all the different people. And by the way, Pat Smith is going to be on our show today, guys.
Nice.
It's not exactly a momentous anniversary, but we decided we missed it last year because of some other controversy. But today is the 21st anniversary of one of my most unforgettable moments on radio when we learned about Mike Price at Alabama.
Wow.
But the digging up there, it really upset people. Another thing I did back then that really got to people, I tried it out one day, and then I ended up doing about 5 of them. I went to Elmwood Cemetery one day and went out to Bear Bryant's grave and wrote an article about having a conversation with him. And it really became interesting because a lot of people felt like it was blasphemous. Anything you want to say about talking to a dead bear. But it became one of the more iconic things I've ever done, because listening to Brian, especially when Mike Dubose was there, I went out and talked to him about Dubose, and I said, he's lost three games. And he said, 3 games in the season, that's terrible. I said, no, coach, 3 straight games. And then I said, I walked away, and you could hear Coach Bryant whimpering, and what's happened to my great program. But that's how we felt during Dubose and Shula and Mike Price and all those different things. What Alabama had has just seen end with Nick Saban. It's a little bit biblical, Tony. You had the 25 years in the desert, and now we have I'm a little bit short of 40, and then we have this run by Saban. You kind of feel, if you're an Alabama fan, maybe the famine's coming again.
Well, to me, I am fascinated at what's going on at the University of Alabama this year, and the transition, and this without Nick Saban, and spring practice without Nick Saban, and on and the focus and how that transition is going to go. Alabama's going to have a really good football team, but is it going to be good enough? And to me, it is, other than the 12-team playoff cranking up, it's the number one story in all of college football is how will it go?
And I'll say one more thing about that, Tony. I think at some point, if everybody at Alabama doesn't stop talking about Nick Saban, everything he does, it's going to hurt. Because there was an article yesterday. Saban speaks at National Prayer Day. Next week, the golf tournament, he'll be playing with DeBoer. And I don't think Saban really is creating any of this, but he's still bigger news than Kalen DeBoer. And he's not. And being on TV will be fascinating because if he says something critical, it will be instantaneous news. And if he continues to just say pablum, people will try to interpret it. We've never really had anything quite like this. Bear Bryant was dead 26 days later. We never had to deal with that type of transition.
Paul, speaking of retro, I hope you won't mind, but the show host here does a decent impersonation of the great Mildred on your Paul Finebaum show. Rob?
Paul, hey, Paul. Paul, I got to tell you, we spent a lot of time at work for years listening to those during lunch or after the market closed at Regions Morgan Keegan. We literally will sit out here at our hunting camp over in Parkin, Arkansas at the Cherry Farm around the bonfire and listen to replays of those old Mildreds. But the one
with Vickers laughing,
Vickers laughing, I almost burst an appendix. How did you, and Bob Lockamy has helped us so much. He loves you. And we met him at the club June 3rd of 21 at a book signing for David Housel. And he just started talking to my wife. I'd called you on the show the day before, Lauren, what do you got? 96 seconds left. Dogs grinding and pounding ball. But I really meant it too the other night. The Mildred, my calculations have her at 104, something like that. Have we heard from her lately?
Yeah, there's a funny story. We had this guy. It was a call. I mean, and Mildred, it got to a point where it was getting really risque. I mean, Mildred was literally talking about being in motel rooms with Bear Bryant. And one day, a friend of mine came up to the radio station. He had actually got his start. He was a grad assistant at Auburn under, I think, Terry Bowden, and then he went to work for Saban at LSU. He actually introduced me to Saban, which a very valuable introduction, knowing Saban before he got to Alabama. Yeah, I don't feel like Tony did all, but so he was up in the studio one day, and I said, "Man, you got," I said, "This thing with Mildred's going crazy," and he laughed at me. He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I don't know, but I just think there's a possibility that Mildred is actually a guy." He said, "Really?" He went in the other room for a second, and it was Mildred he was Mildred, and it was actually a friend of mine named Ronnie Sanders, who now runs an Auburn website, I believe.
Yes,
he's an agent and
24/7.
I finally told him. I said, Ronnie, I said, I appreciate you telling me, but you're fired as Mildred because we just can't handle it anymore. It was too risky.
It was getting out there. It probably helped ratings, though. I got to say, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, people accuse us now of doing things for ratings, which isn't true. Back then, we did literally anything for ratings.
Paul and Tony, I'm gonna throw this to Paul and Tony right now. Have y'all thought about? And I remember back when my brief career, I worked at Channel 3 in Columbus, Georgia, with Reese Davis and Roger Maness. And this was in Reese in 95, I think, is when he went up to Flint, Michigan or somewhere. And then he worked his way to ESPN. He's one of the nicest people I've ever worked. He's incredible. We back then wanted to go back to the basics, the old days with the long hooks, Chris Schenkel, the score. Remember they would manually put them up there. And, have y'all ever thought about doing like the Four Horsemen? We used to have the sports reporters on Sunday mornings. What about, Paul, you're a great writer. Tony, obviously, Buddy Martin, people having something like that again. I know you've already got a lot, both of you, on your plates, but the fans are starved for content. And what I always tell people like Philip Marshall and all of y'all, we get all panicky sometimes after a loss. And then we read an article that y'all write, and it's like we've just been with a therapist, that just, okay, it's going to be all right. Doug has that effect on me. That's why I love having him on. The great writers are the best guests you'll ever have on a show because y'all think about what you're saying. I just wish we could group y'all together.
Well, in true confessions here, I suggested that show when I got to the SEC network, and Tony worked there for a long time, and it was they didn't understand it. It was far too intellectual, and I thought it would be great Sunday morning in football season. It never happened, and I suspect it probably never will.
No. We did a show back in the day. We did a show on WSB Radio in Atlanta on Sunday night called the Sports Writers Roundtable. Mm-hmm. And we put together a panel of guys from the AJC and did a Sunday night show. I think it was on from 7 to 9 on Sunday night. Got a tremendous response. We did a show for CSS called Talking Football many years ago. And that turned, I think Paul's right. I think people are starved for that. For a roundtable of writers and broadcasters who know the sport, who know the league and all that, I think that would be a tremendous idea.
Yeah.
Paul, we put this question early to the great Tony, Mr. Football, Tony Barnhart. You get a shot at it too, Paul, because I'm sure it's a almost daily fodder for your, I don't know how you sit for 4 hours. I admire you, if only for the stamina, Paul Finebaum. My question is, give us your Paul Finebaum fearless forecast 5 to 10 years from now of what we might expect college football to look like? Or is there going to be employed athletes? Is it only the SEC and Big Ten as if the NFL? Or is there collective bargaining? What are the things you would look for?
Boy, if I asked that question to somebody, the response would be, man, that's a great question. So I refuse to do that because I think it will definitely be employees. It'll be fewer leagues. There's no question the SEC and the Big Ten will be a lot bigger. Exactly how that happens, I'm not sure. But anybody who believes the ACC is going to remain the way it looks is kidding themselves. So I think that will be the biggest change. I think overall, it's just going to be a slow, incremental ramp up to really just a more formalized situation that we have now.
Yeah. And for both, I'll throw this to Tony. You think about Bobby Bowden turned down the SEC, and they've turned him down a number of times. Your thoughts about, because Florida State and Clemson are both out there, and I'm of this opinion, the SEC, if the SEC were to add Clemson and add Florida State, would we just be bringing sand to the beach? I mean, Tony, they're great programs, but still.
I can't tell you how many times I've said this. There's a great assumption out there that if Clemson and Florida State are suddenly available, that the SEC is going to fall all over themselves to add them. And I don't see it. Now, maybe it would happen, but look at it from a television standpoint. The idea is to get the ratings as big as you can so you can pay more money for everybody involved. But the fact of the matter is, you've already got the Florida market in the University of Florida. You've already got the South Carolina market in the University of South Carolina. And if schools are making $80 million a year in the SEC, that means if you bring in two schools, those two schools have to generate an additional $160 million so that everybody is nobody's going to take less money this year than they took last year just to have those teams in the field. And there's an assumption that it'd be automatic. And Paul, frankly, I don't see it.
Well, right now, there's no way. Now, things change. And a lot of people, I think the gamble down in Florida and in Clemson is if they start talking to the Big Ten, that will change Greg Sankey's mind. I don't think right now anything is going to change his mind, Tony. And here's the reason. Just think about anyone you've ever dealt with, worked with, been associated with. To do what Florida State has recently done would just be a red flag. I mean, the SEC, in spite of everything, is a very collegial league. You go down to Destin, and these people really do try to work together. And there's just no way they would want to deal with Florida State right now. Frankly, I don't think Florida State's that attractive. If you're talking about, would you rather have Florida State or North Carolina? I think most people would rather have North Carolina.
Right.
It brings a different entity. It may not have the tradition, but you have a tremendous fan base. A lot of things right now really are more based on matchups than geography. I think those days, the Missouri, Texas A&M move, that was for geography related to television. Yeah. Television is pretty simple now. It's not about what it used to be. It's about does Clemson and anyone really matter anymore? I frankly think Clemson is a fading program. FSU isn't quite to that degree, but I think it's a non-starter at the moment.
Paul, you've arguably made a pretty good living putting uncomfortable questions to your guests. So let's turn the tables, and can you handle it? I don't think it's that uncomfortable question, but people wonder. You get to dispel the rumors. The book on your move to the national scene from Birmingham is that there had to be conversations from the bosses in Bristol, Connecticut, that there are certain sensitive styles and issues, social issues, Paul, that here's how we want you to sound. I don't believe Paul Finebaum would sign on to such a gig, but can you enlighten our listeners to that question?
It's been 11 years, and I think Tony can back me on this because he worked for the same place. Yeah. They hired me because they needed a show that tried to connect with fans. But I am a very strong and learned opinion that nobody in Bristol, Connecticut had ever heard the Finebaum show before. Mm-hmm. that's based on the reaction after the first show that went on TV, because they were in shock, and they immediately wanted to get rid of all the callers and stop all this nonsense. It's a long story, and I'm not going to tell it. A lot of people actually think Mike Slive got me the job because we were friends. That's not true. By the way, Mike didn't like the show either. I mean, he was one of my closest friends, but he liked the interviews. I mean, Mike's idea of a great show would be 4 hours of interview. He once asked me, so wouldn't you rather work for NPR? And I said, no, Mike, I wouldn't. I actually think I would go broke working for NPR. And so it was an adjustment. They never told me what when we started, and I was a lot different in 2014 when we launched, because I didn't quite understand what I was supposed to do. But when I called for the firing a year later of the LSU athletic director, Joe Oliva, that's when I started to realize that there were some boundaries that maybe I needed to stay within.
Hey, Paul, I just wanted to ask you really quick. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Brent.
I just wanted to ask you, I always felt like your show, especially now, would be great in front of a live audience. Has there ever been conversation around that? Because I just think it would, because I feel like the audience is its own entity as a guest, and the interaction's always been a part of it. Has that ever been a conversation that
yes,
would?
And so far it's never been signed on to. I think it would be much better, frankly. It doesn't have to be a large audience, but anybody that does what I do would be better in front of people than in a sterile studio with one camera guy laughing. And there was a guy in Atlanta about 6 or 7 years ago that tried to move our show to the Alabama Sports Hall of Fame. Excuse me, the College Football Hall of Fame in Atlanta. And we met with all the people down there, and they were willing to do it. They were going to put a small audience in. I thought it was a really good idea, and I thought the show probably would be smart to go to Atlanta. But the people I work for did not agree, so we stayed where we were.
Paul, you're a provocateur, if nothing else. Here's a question that might feed that.
I love that.
Which of the two head coaches, Kalen DeBoer, what a pedigree coming from Washington and what he's done there in a short time period, Hugh Freeze, which do you think the next 3 years has the more manageable path to keep his fans happy?
The easy answer is neither one, because I think the patience with Freeze is going to run out very quickly. And I think it already is starting to. I mean, his last 3 games were an unmitigated disaster. He loses to New Mexico State, he loses the Alabama game on the final play, and then he doesn't show up in Nashville. He's been able to keep some momentum with recruiting or whatever else he's doing, but I'm not going to give him very high marks so far. I think DeBoer has a chance, but I think DeBoer's problem isn't X's and O's. It isn't what happens on the field. It's dealing with the culture of Alabama football.
Right.
Yeah.
What
Tony,
do you think about Florida? Billy Napier came out recently, says he's going to be the offensive coordinator this year. We cover Florida here. I'm Buddy Martin's son. It's what we do all day. What is your take on this season for Billy Napier? More specifically, he's putting himself, really in front of, I think a lot of people wanted an offensive coordinator, and he came out not doing that. So I guess that's more over my question, Paul, is what do you think about that move?
Well, Braden, first of all, I want to say one thing about your dad. He, to me, is one of the great journalists ever in our industry. And I kid him all the time, and he's sick of it. But the number of times I begged him for a job when he was a big-time sports editor are incalculable. And thank goodness he never hired me, because I would have ended up being somewhere else, and I would have never been able to experience the Alabama-Auburn deal, which helped get me to this spot right now. But
and you guys had fun on talk radio. I mean, I was around for those days. I mean, I remember, a lot of that stuff, because I was 21 producing this radio show.
No, it's just truly remarkable. It's hard to explain, and Tony understands this as young journalists, how giant he was in the industry. And and the stories, as you know, Braden, are endless. As far as Billy, I guess what I'm trying to do here is ignore your question, so I don't have to answer it. I think Napier. I think there's a lot of momentum. I talked to Mertz the other day. I've talked to other players. It feels like things are going well, but all of that is not going to matter if they drop one of those early games that they're not supposed to, because they're suddenly going. There's 4 or 5 games on the schedule. I don't think they can win, and it's a matter of whether they can negotiate the tweener games. And if they can, I think they've got a chance. And I think if there's some momentum toward the end of the year, he'll survive. Otherwise, he's not going to make it.
Yeah. Look, we're about out of time. And I just want to say, Tony, thank you so much. Paul Finebaum, thank you so much. And Doug, Brendan, everybody, our viewers, everybody. Paul, I always believe, and Tony, Pat Sullivan gave a Heisman speech in 1971. He said, every time, he said, I know there have been many award winners who deserve this award a lot more than me, but I can tell you nobody appreciates it more, because every time you step out there, it's not just one, it's an entire group. And by the way, Tony, you probably know this, and Paul, you know, that Friday before Pat Sullivan died, December 1st of 2019, Johnny Musso went over to his house and spent time with him. And you know, that's what's so cool about you and Tony. Y'all know a lot of stuff that goes on that, and it's just, and this is, people know about that. John Musso, his nephew, was a Sigma Nu with me at Auburn. And I remember those games like that back then, like they were yesterday. Just like you reeled off the Memphis State UCLA game in 1973, Paul. I couldn't believe, everybody was like, this guy's, it's crazy. I want to do this again sometime. I just can't thank y'all both enough. That having both of y'all together is just like having Waylon and Willie up on stage together. It's that good. But we're both of y'all, tell Tony first and then Paul how people can follow you and keep up with you, because you bring it every day. You don't have off days, and we're all blessed for it. Tony?
Well, we do a couple of columns a week. Me and my old newspaper buddies have TMG College Sports. We are now, to let people know, we are now under the Athlon umbrella. We used to be under the SI umbrella, but you know how that story goes. And so we are under the Athlon umbrella, and we do, once the season starts, I'm doing at least a couple of columns a week there and doing some radio with my friends in Nashville. And I still enjoy it, and I get to be on with my good friend Paul Finebaum every now and then. So that's fun.
All right. Thank you.
I want to offer one thing before I go about Tony, because the thing that, I mean, there are many things I respect and admire about Tony, but he has been able to do something that I never could do, and most of us can't, is being able to develop relationships in the industry with commissioners, athletic directors, and literally every head football coach imaginable. And that is so rare. And the reason why he was able to do it, guys, and I hope people pay attention to this, is that they trusted him. They would tell him things, and he wouldn't immediately go to Twitter or go to some other forum and report. And that's one of the most important things you can do. I think Tony could be a zillionaire if he ever told all. And I'm hoping that as I call Tony as soon as this ends, that he'll agree to a book deal with me, because I think if Tony told all the stories that he's kept, he would be able to own the Virgin Islands.
Yeah. Well, just please, both of you, don't retire. You're too young anyway, but keep on keeping on. This is as good as it gets. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Have a great weekend, and we'll be back Monday, man. Go out and make it happen. See you.
All right. Thank you.
You bet.
In a perfect world, you'd set a health goal and results would happen overnight. In this world, the real world, it takes time, dedication, and the right support to achieve your best self. The Vitamin Shop's health enthusiasts are here to make sure you're not wasting a single moment on the wrong supplements. From the highest quality sports nutrition and superfoods to the most sought after trends, you'll find a huge variety of science-backed solutions for every goal, and the people to help guide you along the path to greatness.
Unbelievably, every 2 minutes in our communities, a child is either bought or sold for sex. I am Ari Dickey, board member for the Nashville Anti-Human Trafficking Coalition. Join me and millions of others in our fight against human trafficking and for its victims by helping to educate the most vulnerable among us, our middle and high school students. Go to nhtcoalition.org, become a partner, and help keep our families safe, because none of God's children are for sale.